So you tuck your kids into bed, and you pour yourself a drink, and you congratulate yourself for keeping everybody breathing all day long. And then you sit down at your dining room table to deal with your bills and the letters and stuff, and there's the letter telling you if your kid's been accepted into kindergarten. Those are my kids, Maya and Zach, before we knew anything about the school gauntlet that was going to come our way. In my town, Chicago, did you know that it's statistically easier to get your high school senior into Harvard than it is to get your toddler into a tuition-based or regular magnet school, public? Yep, it's true. Imagine if you didn't have to move to the suburbs. Imagine if you didn't have to suck down private school tuition or leave the neighborhood that you love. Okay, quick show of hands. How many people here went to public school as a kid? Okay, everybody, all right. How many people here went to their neighborhood elementary public school? Again, everybody. What do you know? Okay, so just indulge me for a moment. Everybody, close your eyes and go back to that school. And imagine your desk and see your friends and smell chalk. Taste the eraser on a number 2 pencil. And imagine the first teacher who asked you to believe in yourself. Everybody got it? Yeah? Okay. I can get there like it was yesterday. I know that my desk had a whole bunch of chewed gum on the bottom. It was totally disgusting. My first love was Andy Sonnenblick. And my first teacher was Miss Davis, who convinced me that I damn well better learn how to write because someday people would want to hear what I had to say. If you could send your kid back to that school, to your school, would you? Yeah, me too. You know, I think we all would, right? Oh, no, I hear you. I hear you. That's adorable, Jacqueline, but that is not the world we live in anymore. I mean, like, that's cray-cray, right? I mean, look, there's my neighborhood school. It's down the street, perfectly lovely, but that school, that's a disaster on stilts. It is underutilized and underperforming by virtually every measure. Sure, you know, I'd love to walk to school too, but that is simply not an option. Yeah, I hear you. We were 8 moms in a diner, and we took one of the worst schools in Chicago, and we turned it into one of the best in 9 months on a budget of nothing. And you can too. All right, so here's the short story. My ex-husband was supposed to do all of the research on schools. And then he came to me and he told me that he was too busy at work and that I was going to have to do all of that. And it was like, oh my God, you cannot drop that in my lap. I mean, like, that's insane. That's an insane amount of work. And not just for me, but for everybody in almost every urban area. That's crazy. So my girlfriend and I in the park decided we should check out Nettelhorst, which was our neighborhood school, and see just how terrible this place was before we panicked or moved out of the neighborhood or whatever. Now, nobody we knew had ever been inside. It was simply a non-option. It was reputed to have drugs and gangs and violence. Test scores were in the 30s. It was entirely bussed in from overcrowded schools, not to satisfy any racial mandate. It's just that the neighborhood refused to go, evidenced by the fact that of the hundreds of families who lived in my neighborhood and chose a Chicago public school, not one of them chose Nettelhorst. Not one. So we walked in, and the principal at the time, the new principal, Susan Curlin, walked us around. And she said, what do I have to do to get your kids to come to school here? And my girlfriend and I said, you know, that is very interesting. We will come back tomorrow, we'll let you know. So we went home, and we parked our kids in front of Dora the Explorer, and we cracked open a bottle of wine, and we put together a wish list of all the things that we thought would have to be in place in order to make a neighborhood walk back en masse all together. And the list was no different than if I put up a whiteboard in this room and I said, everybody just start shouting out stuff, and we'll just fill it up with all the stuff you'd want to see in school. And we went back the next day with this list, and we said, here, Susan, it should look sort of like this. You want to be a school of choice? It's going to have to look like this. And Susan read our list, and she said, well, let's get going, girls. It's going to be a really busy year. So we organized, and we went back to my neighborhood play lot, and we put all of these mommies onto teams. And we had infrastructure and PR and curriculum and marketing and enrichment and a special events team. And all of those teams had to succeed concurrently to make the project work. We knew we couldn't fix the library one year and then say, next year we'll deal with the curriculum piece, and then maybe we'll do. No, all had to happen simultaneously. And by our lights, we figured we had 9 months to pull it off. So after 9 months of work, we had our first open house from the neighborhood, and 300 families came, and 78 kids signed up for preschool that day. Wow, like quite a hat trick, right? So how'd we do it? Well, the first thing we did was we took Susan out of her school and we brought her to the play lot. And we took her on a walk back to the school, and we showed her sort of what the school looked like from a prospective parent's perspective. What would they see? Now, Nettelhorst was is a beautiful, beautiful red brick building, copper roof, gorgeous. But from the outside, it kind of looked like a penitentiary. All the doors were brown and locked, and all the signage said, no ball playing, no loitering, keep out. Basically, we don't want you here. And the inside, although it was clean, really wasn't a whole lot better. It was all puce and gray and disgusting. You know why schools are that nasty shade of gray? That was the color that was left over from the battleships in World War II. Like, no joke, really. So one of the joys of needing everything is anything you get is just perfect. So we went home, we cracked open a phone book, and we just started cold calling. And we called merchants and tradesmen and craftsmen, anybody, basically everybody that was there. We told them our sad little song, and we said, could you just come into the school and fix something? Adopt one classroom, one hallway, anything. And Susan would open the doors and said, come on and fix it. She didn't ask anybody any permission. She just said, come on in. She'd have the school opened at night, on the weekends, anytime. And we got a whole bunch of paint donated, and we walked in, and we started painting. This is my daughter who had started, and we kept going. We painted every doorway, every hallway, every story, every classroom, everything. We turned the lunchroom into Bistro Louis, and we'd ask artists, are there any parameters, they'd say? And we'd say, oh, well, don't make it scary, don't make it phallic, don't paint the face of Jesus. Other than that, have a field day. So here was Atlantis, and now it was just a scary passageway on the way to lunch. Now all the littlest kids swim to lunch. It was very, very cute. And, we were having so much fun painting, because we got to have our little kids kind of around us, that we just kept going. And we kept going and 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 going. And we kept painting until there wasn't an inch of this school left that hadn't been licked by a neighborhood artist. We put a lot of time and energy into making hospitals and rooms great for kids who are sick, and we should put exactly that same energy for kids who are well. Now, as great as this school looked, we knew it was going to take more than a paint job to bring the neighborhood in. So we talked to a lot of very clever advertising people. And did you know that you can rebrand and reposition a failing Chicago public school as easy as cereal? Well, you can. And the good news is, because you're not shilling Ho-Hos and Twinkies and telling people they're nutritious, It's a whole lot easier because a good school is something that everybody wants and everybody desperately, desperately needs. So even with a great paint job, and even with a decent marketing campaign, we still need to drive a community to the front door, whether they had kids or not. We somehow had to make the school the heart of the community. Now, we were too green to know that change takes decades, which was kind of a good news, because we'd then just set off on knocking everything off of our wish list of what we thought our neighborhood would really like to see. What would turn this school into the heart of the community? So we started a farmer's market. And what that did was sort of turn the front play lot into a town square. And we partnered with the Chamber of Commerce, and we had all of the events that would have been neighborhood events in the front play lot. We had Halloween hooplas and little bunny egg hunts and all kinds of great stuff. We became a site, a water station for the Chicago Marathon. We littered the neighborhood with postcards for community stuff. And most importantly, we became a community school. We had this enormous facility, this great big building, and we said, well, why don't we take this great big building and turn it into a community center all afternoon? So instead of casting 300 kids out into the universe, why don't we just invite 50 instructors into the school, right? That makes a lot more sense. So we called that our sizzle package, and it really did turn Nettelhorst into the heart of the community so that people would put going to and Nettelhorst in the same sentence, which is something that hadn't happened in 2 decades. So that was all super duper, but arguably the most important part of school, right, is school. So before Susan got there, in 10 years, there had been 7 different administrators in a decade. And right before she got there, the board had assigned 2 principals to get the school under control. It really was one of those, kind of Morgan Freeman baseball bat kind of situations. Now, Susan had moved mountains. She really had. The school was safe. It was reasonably well run. She really had done a very, very good job. It wasn't a school of choice, but she really had moved mountains. That said, we walked into an extraordinarily toxic teaching environment. We had one teacher who had a restraining order against her for hitting students in a classroom. We had some teachers who muttered obscenities as they walked down the hallways. It was really actually kind of bananas. And, I am a big union supporter. I was weaned on unions, but the fact that adults let a situation like that fester is, well, frankly, it's just unconscionable. And it doesn't take too many disgruntled teachers to really contaminate a teaching staff. Schools are very, very funny, strange places, and disruptive elements really can do a number. So the curriculum team wanted all kinds of stuff that they thought would kind of protect this incoming group and attract the neighborhood, none of which Susan was willing to do. They wanted a gifted program, and Susan was like, no way. She thought it was pedagogically unsound to divide kids into the red Jays and the blue Jays, and she said, we do differentiated instruction here, and we're going to reach every kid on their own level, and that's how we do things. They're like, okay, we'd like video cameras in the classrooms, right? Same way they have in daycare. And Susan was like, not a chance. You're just going to have to trust me that we are not putting your kids in a veal hut all afternoon. But the most important thing that the curriculum team wanted then was access. They wanted a guarantee that we could have a parent in the classroom every single day. And Susan said, sure. Now, did we have a parent in the classroom every day? No, of course not. We were like a dozen people. But there were a lot of adults popping in all the time. Parents, university people, strangers with notebooks. And a funny thing happened with all the pop-ins. Almost overnight, within the first 2 years of our movement, every single subpar teacher jumped ship voluntarily on their own. It was like magic. And when that happened, when the most disruptive forces in the school left, the teaching climate improved dramatically, and test scores tripled across every demographic. Now, we did not displace any of the kids from an overcrowded school. Every single one of those kids stayed at Nettelhorst through 8th grade until they graduated. But everybody's test scores improved across the board. I'll give you a statistic. When the kids from preschool, who were from the neighborhood, reached 3rd grade, they were tested for the first time. Those kids scored at 100% for math and 91% for reading. You have to go like all the way out to the fancy suburbs to get test scores like that. That same year, the 8th grade kids, every single one of them on free and reduced lunch, every single one minority, all of those kids' scores improved, so much so that every single kid tested high enough to go to any selective magnet school they chose. Now, I think it's really remarkable to have closed the achievement gap like that. And it really was proof positive that a rising tide really does raise all boats. But even raising everybody up like that, we often felt like we were drowning given the funding crisis. Illinois ranks 47th in the country for state funding to education, making the second city the 4th worst. Now, we had a fundraising team on it, obviously. We disbanded that team within 6 weeks. What we realized is that nobody wants to give money to a failing Chicago public school. And the parents in the park didn't want to get shaken down either because they had already invested so much sweat equity in this project. So we stopped asking for money and we started asking people to dream with us, to dream that we could deliver something better for kids. Now, 4 years into this movement, 4 years, we finally figured out how to stop asking for paint 1 gallon at a time, and we learned how to create deep, mutually beneficial partnerships. When we asked people to dream with us, and then we could turn to institutions and people, and we could attack some of those larger, big capital projects that required more than glitter and a glue gun to pull off. So when we asked people to dream with us, we were able to say, you know what? We want to hit childhood obesity hard. And then we partnered with the Chicago Blackhawks to renovate a fitness room. You know, we want to do something about nature deprivation in children, so we partnered with Architecture for Humanity and Nature Explorer and made an outdoor classroom. And because we asked people to dream with us, people who shared our vision, and we came off with handoff-ready proposals to do it, we were able to knock out playgrounds and a teaching kitchen and a gymnasium and an auditorium and a dance room. All this big, great, amazing stuff. But we did that all through fundraising and grants and volunteer labor and sweat equity. It's not as if it was handed to us. We had to hustle it all from the universe. Now, all of that's super, right? But one of the dangers is that now somebody might walk into Nettelhorst and see all this fancy, great stuff and think that this is the inevitable byproduct of gentrification, right? You know, they'll walk into the community kitchen, the one that Nate Burkus renovated for us, and they'll see the fancy subway tiles and the stainless steel appliances, and they'll think that, you know, this is the byproduct of money. Money made this happen. Well, the fancy stuff not only came later, but money did not power the Nettelhorst revolution, right? The kitchen that replaced, the one that we built out of dumpsters and cast off from community home supply, that kitchen served exactly the same function. Our principal wanted to teach kids about nutrition and cooking, and we wanted to bridge the homeschool connection, and frankly, we wanted a clubhouse. And that's how that happened. So money didn't power the Nettelhorst revolution. People powered that revolution. But you know, people are funny, and change is hard. And it wasn't all rainbows and sunshine and unicorns. We dealt with a lot of race and class issues, and it was not easy stuff. There was one time where I was painting Atlantis towards the beginning. In the afternoon, I was by myself, and a teacher walked by, and she actually spit on me. Yeah, I know, right? And I'm sure there was a nicer way to say it, but she did have a point, right? The point was, you know, who are these entitled mommies, you know, with their Scandinavian toys and their double lattes and their strollers? Like, they're not even educators. Like, who are these people? How did they get there? Who let them in? And who's giving them, why are they even here, right? And that's kind of valid. She had a valid point. And the point was, we were entitled. We were not okay with the status quo. And we were entitled in that we believed that the system was supposed to work for us. Now, if systems knew how to fix the schools, if the system knew how to do that, schools would be fixed. But they're not. So yes, there is some degree of arrogance that says, you know what? If it's not good enough for my kid, I actually don't think it's good enough for your kid either. And we can have a fight about whether Harris or ABT or the Joffrey is a better ballet, and we can take that out to the playground, and I'll duke it out with you. But you know what? I'm actually going to hold my ground and say that every kid deserves dance. And they deserve theater and music and art and physical education and science and computers. And they deserve a top drawer education. And by God, it is our job. It is like our job to deliver that to them if we can. Now, change is hard. It's really hard. But it's not like we were rocket scientists. It's not like we were building a reactor. We were 8 moms in a diner. This is doable stuff. But what we couldn't have anticipated was that there would be thousands of people behind us who wanted, you know, people we didn't know, but people who wanted it just as badly as we did and were willing to roll up their sleeves to work to make it so. Now, I was in DC, and I was at this very fancy, important conference. And this woman stood up, and uber respected educator, like the woman runs an entire huge urban district. And she said, Ms. Von Edelberg, I understand your school is great, and you mommies sound great, and you parents sound great, and that's all great, 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 great. But until this project is brought to scale, it really isn't germane to the public policy debate on education. And all I could stammer in this room full of experts was, really? I thought we'd already gone to scale. I thought parents had already scaled that problem already. You know, we have all been sold this bill of goods. And it's kind of our fault too, right? But we've been sold this bill of goods that's told us that the state of education is beyond our control. That unless you're Jeffrey Canada or Oprah Winfrey or Mark Zuckerberg, that there's simply nothing we can do about it. And that is just not true. And we do not need to wait for some brand new fancy education initiative to drop from the sky. We already have the power to fix our schools. The neighborhood school model succeeded in this country for 100 years. It is as old as the theater we are in. So I have a hard time wrapping my mind around the idea that that model is inherently flawed. But the neighborhood school and the public school model that this entire country is based on was not meant to only educate the poorest and most disadvantaged and disenfranchised among us. And until we wrap our arms around our schools and invest with our time and our talents and our energy, and most importantly, our children, education is always going to be somebody else's problem. So you know what? They can fight about testing and charters and vouchers and all that kind of stuff. They can do that. They can do that till the cows come home. And you know, I am glad that there are people, you know, smart people on that job, but I don't have a dog in that fight. You ask a mom with a 4-year-old if she has time for the great education garbage barge to turn around. She doesn't have time for that. We don't have time for that. We need our schools to work like right now, like yesterday, like now. Now. Public school belongs to the public. And that's all of us. So gather up some friends and walk into your neighborhood school and say to the principal, "Hi, we're here to help." And I think if we all did that in our own neighborhoods, I think we could create real systemic change in this country. And I think that's an idea worth spreading.